Hello, everyone. It's great to have you guys back to the show. I'm honored to have Jacobe Baldwin Barrett. I'm used to calling him Jake, so it's a little weird saying his whole name, but he's a great nature photographer specializing in capturing the stories of animals, which I think is very fascinating. And there's a great element of conservation in his work. Not only conservation of nature, but also conservation of the stories of the animals and the places. And I think it's a really beautiful journey and mission, and I'm glad to have him on the podcast. He's also, an artist that works with Corey and Andrew. They all shared studio space at one time. They worked on the Artist Commons together, and I'm really excited to have him on the show. So
glad to be here.
Jake,
thank you.
I figured we could start first with why you chose to put your full name. I do that too. I do Michael Jordan Pilgreen.
Yeah.
And also your logo, if you want to get into that story as well.
The full name, I thought it sounded more like an artist name, so that's why I went with it. I've really never gone by Jacob at all my entire life until now. So as weird as it is for you to say, it's weird to hear it. And even when I'm at shows or whatever, and people come up and say, "What are you, Jacob?" I say, "Yeah, I'm Jake." So it's really weird. But the logo is definitely one of the first things I did when I started this project. I was really happy to come up with it because it really does encompass everything. So the circle in my logo represents the earth. The hourglass represents time in general, and the time that Earth has left. The 5 lines in the bottom of the hourglass represent the 5 mass extinctions that Earth has gone through, and the line falling through the hourglass represents the current period of mass extinction that we are in right now.
Yeah, and I always found that really beautiful. And there's actually a double meaning to the logo
100%.
Too. Do you want to tell people about that?
So this one was by happenstance. I came up with it kind of long after, maybe a year after I designed the logo. But the circle represents the lens of the camera. The hourglass shape represents the refraction of light. The lines in the bottom represent the photos that I have captured, and then the one going through the hourglass shape is the photo I'm capturing in the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's really beautiful because, the capturing of the now is always happening, and it's that conservation theme, that through thread. So I love that double 100%. Meaning in the logo.
Kismet.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah, and so you designed the logo yourself too, right?
Yes, 100%.
You've done all of it.
Yeah.
One thing about you that I think the audience and viewers will notice rather quickly is very few things you do is on accident.
Yeah, that's very true. Every bit of the complete work really was a designed piece of it. So I really did come up with the whole concept before I ever did any part of it, and it was with the whole story of it. I'm not just a photographer, I always say that, and I'm not just taking photos, but each complete piece is the work, and so it's more than just the photo. So every single aspect of the piece is important for the piece.
Yeah, and I think that's beautiful too. I think as we get into Jake's story and the materials he works with, and also the process and methodology, you'll see that Jake is exhaustively attentive to detail. Every part of the experience of the piece, not only for the collector, but for him as an artist, goes into this collage of experience. And the only way I can describe it is an actual artifact. His pieces are constantly trying to capture the moment, not just in the photograph itself, but also the material. And that was one thing that always drew me to your pieces and the way you work that I really enjoyed and experiencing as someone has one of your pieces, luckily enough now. But maybe let's take it back for a second. Maybe tell everybody kind of how you grew up and just kind of your experience in childhood.
Well, I have no background in photography at all, so that was never a thing. I loved being in nature and observing nature, but I was the kid that my mom was taking photos of me. I was never the one grabbing the camera and taking photos. Never had really an interest in taking the photos, but loved seeing the animals. And I had any trips that we went on, family trips, I would be keeping track of all that. Like, I'd make lists of all the animals that we saw on the trip and stuff. So it was always a love of animals and nature, but animals primarily. Love of nature came from vacations with family, but also we had a remote cabin in West Virginia that was off the grid completely, and I would spend my summers up there in between school. And so from when I was 4 to 13, 14 in there, every summer pretty much I'd be up there for 3 months. And so I was very close with nature, being completely off the grid, and just being, some cool experiences. When we were building the place, I was a part of actually building the cabin, and that was when I was 4. And there was a couple coyote pups that would hang around the construction site. And so every time whenever I'd be up there the next year, it was for 3 or 4 years they hung around, but they would just come up to us. There's photos of me playing with them like they're a pet dog,
That's crazy.
And they would steal people's tools. And years later, I found a little hideaway where they had hid all these tools.
Wow.
And so anyway, that was really cool. And so just experiences like that with animals. And I went to Sanibel Island in Florida a good bit, where I take a lot of photos. This photo right here, but a lot of photos we'll be looking at are from there still today. But that's always been a favorite spot and a special place where I got to experience nature in a different way than a lot of people.
Yeah, when you say off-grid, people throw that word around all the time. You mean like no internet?
Completely off the grid, yeah. We didn't have power for a good while, good number of years. So, candlelight, and we had propane, so you could cook and stuff, but no electric for a while. I forget exactly when that happened, but we did at some point get solar, and that's the only power we have there still today is solar, and then natural spring water, and the spring is on the land. It was used a couple hundred years ago as a spring, so completely off the grid. 5 miles up a dirt road.
What a great experience, growing up, because you're from Memphis, for those that don't know. Memphis is a mid-sized American city. We have roughly 1 million people here. But having that experience, when you were growing up, did you always kind of have this compare and contrast between city life and going to your cabin?
I've always appreciated both. So I like both. It's really hard for me to pick, just like people say, pick the beach or the mountains or whatever. I can't. And so I can't pick any place over another. I really like being able to change it up. So I always appreciated that for sure when I was a kid, being able to be up there and experience that in such a intense way for 3 months, but then come back and be normal.
Yeah. Yeah. So, return to city life.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. And when you were growing up, how was schooling for you? Did you learn more, you felt like, from being out in the cabin? Or?
Definitely, yeah. Gotcha. No question. I've always felt like through college, I feel like I have learned way more outside of traditional school than in school.
That's awesome. And did you have any subjects you gravitated to in school? Or?
Different years, different things, but I wouldn't say it. Not really. It just wasn't ever something that I was as interested in as things that I learned and got involved in outside.
Yeah.
But I always had more of a mind or whatever for math So
yeah,
that's what I ended up technically going to college for, was business finance. So
okay, cool.
I don't know if you knew that, actually.
No,
Surprise.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
So,
that's
but
awesome.
even with that, like, I learned more teaching myself during COVID than I did actually in school.
Yeah,
in that realm and world. So
gotcha. And when you were growing up, when did the building things start happening? When did you start putting stuff together?
I guess I've always been around it. So even with the cabin when I was 4, being able to be involved with that process. So the crew was always, nice enough to let me either, maybe I wasn't helpful, but, let me at least attempt to be helpful. So that was fun. And then our neighbors up there, the guy that lived close by was a handyman type guy, and, did a lot of various stuff. So I learned from him, and then being around Corey and Andrew and then John next door, and, just learning, always been interested, but didn't get as involved personally until this, really.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
or really Corey. I mean, meeting Corey and then being involved with all the stuff that we got involved with before I came up with this venture.
Yeah, this might be good if people are following other podcasts, but how'd you meet Corey and Andrew and all that?
Yeah, so involved. So I was involved with a business where called Mad Air Decks, and we were worked with local artists to paint the bottoms of skateboard decks, and so they could be either displayed as art or ridden like a normal skateboard. And so I was involved with that, and Corey was a part of the Artist Commons and a couple other ventures, and all 4 of us that were involved in those 2 things kind of became involved with doing all of those things together, and then got encouraged to pursue this through all of those people. And
yeah, I didn't know you were a skateboarder either. Did you skateboard?
Yeah, I did a little
That's
bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
When did that start? Like in your teenage years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then did you make the business?
I didn't start the business.
Okay.
Madison Harrison started the business, but then I became involved with it, and I was on the business side of it. So not as
so you weren't
artist.
Gotcha.
I did I engraved a deck with a like a engraving burning tool, and I can't think of the name of it, but yeah, I did one, and that was cool. But
that's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know how you and Corey and Andrew all met.
Yeah.
I thought you guys all just started the Artist Commons together.
I wasn't even a part of it technically, but
gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha.
We all worked on everything together, kind of, for a little while in there.
That's really cool. So you, after Mad Air Decks, what were you doing after that before you started doing your own photography?
I started working on this, and then I was also in that time got back into business finance world and started doing stock trading.
Gotcha.
And really teaching myself how I wanted to do that in an ethical way and environmentally friendly way. And so I was doing that. I was also working on a project that I called HOME, Humans Opposed to Mass Extinction was the acronym. And so that was the idea of that was that it could be an umbrella company for climate groups or people that are, organizations that are working on climate change ideas. And so the idea was it could be an umbrella to get all of those entities that would want to be under the umbrella to work on the same thing at once and get people to go in a certain direction. Yeah. And so I was doing that, and had done a lot of research with regard to that into what organizations I really wanted to try to reach out to and go after, and spent some time going to DC and actually talking to congresspeople about it, and got some really good response and some not so good response, and as you would imagine, and really saw of course, that it was going to be a very long, tedious road that was not going to be very enjoyable and might not even work in the end.
Yeah.
And so that's when, alongside doing some of what you're going to get to here with the spyglass photography, I was doing that at the same time. And all the people that were involved with Matter Decks and Artist Commons and all of that were pushing me to get more into this. And I was like, okay, how can I use this and be out in nature and all of that, push the same message that I'm pushing with home, but actually enjoy my life.
Yeah.
Basically. And so that's how this got started as okay, I need to come up with an idea. How can I do this photography thing, but in a way that isn't just another wildlife photographer selling prints?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the capital markets, the political organizing, you realized from your early exploration of both of those that those are longer time horizons. They take...
Yeah, I got a little bit off there. So it coincided with, I was doing the stock trading as well, but I was the whole aim of that was to do it in an ethical way.
Yeah.
So, which I don't even know now really if I believe that can be done. But the attempt was to try to convert a lot of my family's just finances to a more ethical direction. And so not investing in mutual funds and ETFs and things that are going to be invested in what I consider unethical companies, anything that supports war, any oil and gas companies. I don't want to invest in any of those. And you really can't invest in any mutual fund unless it's a green ETF or mutual fund or whatever that is going to avoid those. And so all the people out there that are just like, push it off to a financial advisor, you do you, and they don't even know that they're invested in Halliburton and Exxon and whatever else, right?
Yeah.
And so if everybody, not that you have to be as involved as I am on a daily basis, but you can just look at your favorite ETF, and instead of being invested in that ETF and those 25 companies in it, go through those 25 companies, pick out your favorite 20, make your own ETF.
Yeah.
And so that was the original impetus for getting involved with that, and that was it. All just kind of coalesced.
Yeah, and it's super fascinating because a lot of people have these stereotypes of artists that they're pie in the sky dreamers, they're not thinking about anything practical, they're non-STEM people, non-science, technology, engineering, math.
True.
But it's interesting because you actually have a strong sense of finance and business and approach to the world than many artists do.
Yeah.
So do you just kind of find passions and pursue them, or I guess how do you develop these interests and how do you realize they're your interests?
I still have a hard time calling myself an artist.
Gotcha.
For one. So that's just my own personal thing, but that comes from kind of having that different mindset than most artists or whatever. And so I do treat it much more like a business, I feel like, than a lot of artists do. And I think that's kind of a mistake that a lot of artists make, is they don't treat their work as a business.
For sure.
And thus they oftentimes leave money on the table or aren't really getting compensated for their actual work and creativity and everything else that goes into making whatever their piece is. Actually treating your time as time that has to be paid for. So I think all of that comes from my not really having a background in art at all, and really being in those other worlds or whatever. I don't know.
But all that being said, it seems like once you find a passion, you just kind of pursue it, and you might not want to put a label on it. So we can transition to this, or we can transition to these first pieces that you were making. First of all, it's an interesting story how you were making them.
Yeah.
But what made you like, all right, I'm going to snap this picture, and this isn't going to be the last one?
Yeah. So this was in Sanibel, and the story behind it in particular this was one of the first ones I did like this, but we were on a family trip, and this bird was a good ways away. I didn't have a camera of any kind other than my iPhone, and had binoculars, and was looking through the binoculars, and then thought, oh, what if I take a photo through the binoculars? So I did, and I thought it was a really cool, effect of having the total blackout around and just the focus on the animal. So I repeated it a couple times, and people thought it was pretty cool, and so it's like, oh, I'll do this some more, and did it for, every time I went on a trip or whatever, I tried to take some photos like that for a little while, and it was just kind of a fun thing I did for a bit until then. All the artists that I was around were saying that they thought it was really good and I should, push into it more.
So at that time, you're still thinking of yourself more of like as a businessman, perhaps, or a financier.
That's the...
Gotcha. So an entrepreneur, and you're just surrounded by artists, and you start showing them this, and they're like,
you got something here.
Yeah, do some more. Some more. So it started off fun. Where in there did it start becoming like, all right, this is an art making process and all that? It
really was. So it was on the back end of home, and that all kind of hitting a wall where it was like, okay, I can either leave this here for now, or it's going to be a lot more, It was either committing to doing that for some years or taking a break on that. And so it was all of that in conjunction, and this happened the same, this was getting further along, or I was doing it more and more and being encouraged to push into it more. And so that's when I was like, okay, let me take this idea of focus on the animal and really getting the animal as a character and as an individual, and have all of the messaging of home somehow wrapped up in it as well. Yeah. And that's what led me to basically just trying to come up with an idea of how I wanted to show my photos to differentiate.
Yeah, and one of the first conversations I remember having with you personally was about this idea of art as advocacy. Where did that phrase come from? When I first heard it, it sounded so natural.
Yeah.
That it took me a while to digest it, but maybe talk a little bit about what it means to you. And
that's okay. I can't take full credit for the term. My mom came up with it, but we were kind of brainstorming when I was first coming up with this whole idea, and I was just, kind of brainstorming with her about stuff, and she has a knack for coming up with the good alliteration titles and stuff. She's a writer, so she has an ability to do that, and just said it, and we both went, that sounds good. And so it has been a part of it since the beginning. I mean, long before the whole idea of the piece really came to fruition, that term was like, okay, that's a really good one to hold on to. So,
and
because it embodies it really well.
Yeah, and it goes straight into everything you've been talking about so far, like taking control of your own family's financial investments, but also the idea of home, and now it becomes art as advocacy. Was that a turning point for you?
That, and time-wise, I don't know how long, but a little bit after that whole brainstorming period, when I really started to come up with the idea as a concrete idea in my head, I thought, hey, I think this could be something cool. So it was really when I was like, okay, I'm going to commit to this as a thing. And then COVID happened, so that was a delay. But that's when I really knew I wanted to try to do it.
Yeah, and it became a way, it seems, for you to take action immediately and not wait for anybody else or time, but
still appreciate it and enjoy nature and wildlife and travel and be able to do all those things as well, so to not make it such a slog.
Yeah. And one thing that's important about your work is the travel, but also the experience of being in nature. I know this isn't in chronological order, but I believe this is a picture from Portugal.
Yes. This one's from Madeira Island, Portugal, which is one of the coolest places I've ever been by far. Top couple of places, and that I would love to go back. Will go back for sure. Very cool, unique environment. Volcanic islands that are actually closer to Morocco than they are to Portugal, or to any of Europe, and because they are volcanic in the way they formed, they've never been close to any larger landmass, and thus there are no animals pretty much on the island except for domesticated animals that have been brought there.
Wow.
There's some birds, and there's like 5 spiders or something like that, a few different reptiles, but very, very few animals on the entire island. And it's a decently sized island. It's not, tiny. And so it's just a really unique landscape and environment because of that.
Yeah, and when you see pictures of your pieces, I know every artist says this, but they really don't justify the piece itself.
Yeah.
But for you, I think it's because of all the hidden treasures within the piece. We'll zoom in for the viewers, but you see these 4 vials down here, and there's also a plaque that comes with it. Mm-hmm. Maybe just talk the viewer through where that idea came from, what it represents, and how it's interactive in a way for a collector.
So, and also all my stuff is large scale too. So that's the pictures
exactly.
Can't really show you how big stuff is, but everything is large. And that was always important to me as well. I really want them to be statement, big, in your face things. And so that's one thing that you just don't get unless you're in person. Each aspect of the piece, so it really was about from the frames too. So that was the first thing where I knew I wanted to frame all my prints, and having the live edge wood and the natural looking wood rather than a normal frame was always key, just to bring it more to nature, right? Bring you into nature. Originally, I thought I would always, I wanted to match up the wood to the photo for location and this and that and the other. I've really come to like just matching it up based on look a lot more, and so I don't really even pay attention to necessarily where the wood came from in terms of matching it to the photo. It's really much more about how it's going to work with the photo and as a whole piece. Mm-hmm. But I very much like doing all these frames with the holes in the frame and where it's very thin in places and thick in others and hard to really even understand how it's being held together. So that's always fun. The vials, they represent the elements: fire, water, earth, and air. So it's symbolic of the interconnectedness of all life and a reminder that humans have to do better. So that is my climate awareness message that is in every piece. The items in the vials are not from location, and they are the same for all of my pieces. I do custom work as well, where we can change out a display, and I'll get into that in a second. But the main point of that is as that climate awareness message. And the original intent was to have those items always be from location as well, like the frame and the wood. That's just untenable, really. And I can't do that for every photo because I don't know what photos are going to be keepers when I'm taking them. And a lot of my photos are in places where it's illegal to take anything from there, so I can't really do that. But again, on my custom stuff, I will work with people to have items in there that are more from location and stuff like that. But for my basic pieces, it's just that climate message. The plaque, I always knew I wanted to include more information, and I'm still thinking of ways to include even more information, actually. But this was always a must in the beginning. They're all removable, so you can hide them on the back. If you'd like to display the work without the plaque, you can still keep all the information, but have it hidden on the back. It also has information on the back of the plaque, so it had to be removable for that as well. But I include as much info as most people, really want to know off the jump about any piece, what the photo's of, where I took the photo, and it gets, for some pretty specific. It tells you the campground in Yellowstone National Park or whatever. And then the type of wood I use for the frame is included, as well as where I got the wood. All of the wood is reclaimed or salvaged wood as well. So it's all either going to the dump or reclaimed from an old building or something like that. Then also there's information on the bottom that does talk about the vials. So that's all explained on the plaque as well. And then the back explains my logo, which the logo is on every print and the black margin of the print and the heavy weighted portion at the bottom there. And so that whole thing I went through in the beginning of what the logo means is on every plaque as well.
So one reason I put this piece at the beginning too, I had no idea about that there was only domesticated animals on there, but it's one of the few landscapes that you framed. Mm-hmm. And I was just curious on your take of landscape versus, organisms in the landscape, mm-hmm. and how nature speaks to you.
So landscapes is not my main focus for sure. I have a harder time seeing a good photo of a landscape when I'm out in nature than I do seeing an animal and knowing how I want it to look or capture that animal, for one. So that's just one thing about why I don't take as many, I think. But it's also just not what I'm as interested in as that, which is interesting why I like Madeira so much, because there are no animals. But it was just such a cool environment and very beautiful, and so it was impossible not to like it. And the animals and capturing that individuality of an animal, rather than, there are dogs, but everyone that has dogs knows their dog versus someone else's dog, and that dog's different, mm-hmm. And you can understand that with pets, but I look at all animals that way, and so I really want to capture that bobcatness or whatever, Yeah. So that's just what I really got into it all for, more than the landscapes. But when I see a pretty landscape or a pretty shot or whatever, I get, I still like to take that too.
Yeah, it's a striking landscape, and it feels, as a person that hasn't been there, it feels like where heaven is meeting earth a little bit.
It's definitely mystical. It's a very mystical, special place, definitely.
And do you feel, with your relationship to nature, do you experience a mystic, a supernatural, or are you just in awe of the natural itself? Or how do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely just appreciate nature for nature's sake. I think it's amazing enough as it is. I don't think I have to try to figure out why it's so cool and amazing. Yeah. And I just appreciate it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's great to just observe nature and take it in, but it's also, a great segue and fascinating to try to capture just the stories you observe through watching other organisms interact with the nature. And that's why I love this one. I love this one.
Yeah.
It's a cool one. Did you end up selling out of all these?
No, I actually switched the print that this frame was in out with another print for a Florida show, and sold that piece. So I got to make a new frame that matches up with this photo. So I do have this one printed, but not framed currently. But a lot of people like this photo. I like this photo too. It's still a little different than my, like, traditional photos that I get, because it does show a little more landscape, but for this one it works quite well. It does tell more of the story. And so I liked it too, because it turned out well in black and white, which is another thing that I'm still not as comfortable with when I'm taking photos, knowing whether or not it's going to be a good black and white photo. So every time I have a black and white photo, cool that you started with two of them, because I do like all of my black and white photography, but I don't have as much of it as I would like yet.
Yeah, and I love this one because for some reason, well, first of all, before I sound ignorant, will you tell me what we're looking at?
It's a bighorn sheep, and it's in Badlands National Park, and it was, as it looks, walking right along the edge of the cliff above me and Corey as we were walking through this ravine path. There's another landscape, I don't think it's in here, but there's another landscape photo that shows the ravine path that we're walking down, and you can kind of get a perspective of where we were in relation to where the bighorn sheep was, up on the ridge.
Wow. Yeah, and it's so crazy to see a bighorn sheep in this situation, because for some reason, to me at least, when I look at it as a viewer, there's a very human element in the sheep, like how it's experiencing the cliffside. I don't know, in life sometimes you find uneven footing, unsure about the next step, and
100%.
This image just captures that so well.
Definitely.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite pieces by you. It reminds me a lot of, and we'll get into this too, but like Ansel Adams, black and white nature shot.
Appreciate it.
Do you have any artistic? So one thing we got into with Corey, and this is just everyone approaching art differently. You start taking photos with your iPhone through binoculars. I'm assuming with these last two, with the Portugal landscape, and this one, you're finally using your own digital camera, correct?
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Did you do any like studying of other nature photographers? Was there any inspirations for you to continue evolving your craft?
Not so much. I looked at a guy named Anthony Morganti, and he puts out a lot of videos on editing photography, and so just to learn how to use Lightroom, and I don't really use Photoshop, but I use Lightroom, and so to learn how to properly take and then edit a photo. So, I take all of my photos darker than they're going to be printed, and then brighten them post to save more detail. And you can always brighten it more, but if you take it just a smidge too bright, you can't save that detail. So I always take it far darker than you would want the photo to be finished. And so that was something that I got from Anthony Morganti. So that kind of thing. I studied the technology of the camera, how to use this camera, or I first had to figure out which camera I wanted, and then went down that path with a couple different cameras to figure out which one and everything, but not so much studying another photographer, and no, not really.
Yeah,
on that.
That's still fascinating. It's still fascinating everyone's evolution as an artist.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, something about these photos to me. So this is the next photo. This is the jackrabbit.
Definitely one of my favorites for sure. So,
and I think it just, I want to get into this a little bit too, is how you choose locations, how you're approaching the photo shoots, and how long does it take to capture such a candid picture of a creature.
So I do a lot of my stuff differently than most photographers, right? Because I don't have that background. So I just treat it all as how I always have when I've been going on hikes and observing nature or whatever, by whatever manner, kayaking in Florida or whatever it is. But I don't really stake out too much. So I don't really stay in one spot and go, okay, I know there's a whatever over here. I'm going to sit here and wait until it comes out. I really just don't do that too much. So it's a lot more luck of the draw, I guess. But I don't know. There's something to when you aren't making a lot of noise and you're just walking through, everything can still hear and see and knows you're there before you know it's there. But if you're not being, obtrusive, then animals come out more. And I've had that experience my entire life, no matter really what environment I've been in. And it's remained true for taking photos. So like this guy popped out and I took a photo. He wasn't there for very long at all, but he popped out, looked at me, and then went back into the bush. As I was just walking along, actually to a different spot where I wanted to try to get some photos of a red-tailed hawk. So it was, again, a little bit kismet, but this is definitely more my, bread and butter, so to speak, or whatever. This is what I'm really going for as a look for my photos, in really capturing that rabbit as an individual animal, not a rabbit or a black-tailed jackrabbit, but that black-tailed jackrabbit. And reading your website, one thing you talked about in this piece, and it does remind me of Alice in Wonderland a little bit, with the rabbit with the timer. Yeah. But you said this is a sage. That was the word you used. 100%. Do
you just let the animal speak to you, like when you're...
Yeah, 100%. I took the photo, and when I put it in, I don't remember now if I remember taking this photo specifically, because I took so many photos over this day, that week, that whole trip, right? But when I looked at it on Lightroom when I got back home, immediately was like, oh, this is before I even finished, editing it and putting the proper lighting on it and whatever. I knew it was a winner. Knew it was one of my favorites immediately, just because the vibe of the rabbit. And it's so funny. So yeah, say a sage, wise old rabbit. That's what I see when I see it, for sure. But everyone else sees different stuff. So I mean, half the people that see this photo end up telling me oh, what an angry rabbit. Okay, fine. So that's the individual you see in the rabbit. So, so that's perfectly fine too. But yeah, capturing an essence that you can even extrapolate from is the point.
Yeah, and we'll get into it later. But you don't just do warm furry animals either. You're not.
No.
I guess what I want to ask you is, it seems to me as an observer of your work that you're not going in with any judgments about anything.
No, I am happy to photograph any animal that wants to run across the trail.
Yeah.
And that's funny too. So again, one of the original ideas, alongside the having artifacts from the location and using wood only, when I first came up with this idea, I was being very strict with myself of, I'm only going to use wood from that location, where it could be a tree that you're looking at in the background, or et cetera, et cetera. And the idea then really was about, I am only going to take photos of endangered species.
Gotcha.
Well, that's challenging.
Yeah.
They're all endangered.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and there's plenty of other animals that are running around that might be endangered in 10, 20 years. So why not take photos of them immediately? I was just like, well, that's dumb. So I'm not going to commit to that. And so, but to your point, I have absolutely no judgment about which animal I want to take a photo of. And some people love a raccoon, as you're seeing now, or some people hate raccoons, or some people love snakes, or hate snakes, or spiders. And so there's some animals that people walk by and they'll see a photo and freak out and not come in, don't want to look at anything and act like they have to run away. And then the next person will walk by and that'll be their favorite photo. So yeah, I'm not going to, say, well, I'm never going to take a photo of that,
And that's a great segue. We do have a photo of a raccoon up now. A lot of people in cities and country think of raccoons as nothing but a nuisance, but they're highly intelligent creatures themselves.
Yeah.
And I think this picture, I'd love to hear you talk about it, captures that intelligence.
Well, this one's a fun one. Has a good story with it. So I take a lot of my photography from a kayak when I'm in Florida, especially. And I was kayaking in some backwater area through a bunch of mangroves in Ding Darling Wildlife Refuge in Sanibel, Florida. Again, Sanibel. And all of a sudden, it was super quiet, very calm, still day, no noise at all. And then all hell broke loose in the background, some deep in the mangroves. It was crazy noise. And I was just like, okay, I'll hang out here for a minute and see what happens. And then 5 minutes later, out comes a raccoon, and it came right out and washing its hands, washed its face, just didn't know I was there at all. And then realized I was there and looked up at me, and that's when I got the photo. I'd taken a couple other photos, but I always like the photos where they're looking at the camera. And it was just very cool moment. And I had no clue what was going to walk out. And then it was a raccoon. And then I was just watching, had a fight back there. I don't know what, and was washing up after the fight, and then looked at me and stayed there for a second, washed its hands again, and turned around and went back into the mangroves.
In a lot of these photos, you're coming eye to eye with nature. It's so interesting how many faces nature has, and I think your work is doing a great deal dealing with the faces of nature. And I just love taking stereotypes and turning them on their heads. And I think this photo does a great job doing it, because we think of raccoons as these dirty nuisance animals, right. And in the wild, he's washing his hands.
Yeah, exactly.
That's better than some humans. So.
Right. You just don't think of seeing raccoons in that sort of environment even, right? Because you just think of them as the city animal, kind of.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
Oh, and this is one that I would have loved to collect it, but it was too large for my walls at the time.
Yeah.
And what's funny about this one, I'll let you talk about it, but from the description, right, this isn't the large snake it appears to be in the photos, right? So maybe
you can kind of get the sense if you think about those leaves. And so, but at first, when you're looking at it, you just assume it's a big snake. But the little branch it's on is way smaller than my pinky in terms of how big around it is. And those leaves are only a couple inches long. And the snake was maybe 2 feet long. So it was a really small snake. And I happened to just be very close to it, which it didn't mind. It seemingly didn't mind at all. It didn't move the whole time I was taking photographs of it. I walked away and then came back, and it was still in the same spot. I think actually this photo is one of the ones where I got when I walked back, because the light was a little different. The sun had gone behind or came out from behind a cloud. But I loved this photo. I thought the snake just set it up perfect, how it was positioned. Being able to see the scales and the detail in the scales, and then as you see with a lot of my photos, I have a very narrow depth of focus. So I always have that focus on usually the eye of the animal. And so I really like that background being blurry and forcing you to focus on the animal. But then having the background with it's a good complementary colors in the photo. So it just works really well with it. So yeah, thank you, Snake.
Yeah, and the subject in a dynamic pose. Yeah. Do you have a favorite animal?
My favorite animal's always been a spider monkey since I was a kid.
Interesting.
So I'll just stick with that. That's what I always said when I was a kid. Was a spider monkey.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, I love this. Where was this photo taken, and how large did you print it?
I forget the dimensions of that large print. I don't have it in my mind.
It's all good.
But a few feet by a few feet.
Yeah.
So very big. This is a smaller one. So this one's like 2 by 3. The other one's like 4 by 5.5 feet, something like that. So a lot larger on the one that you originally saw. And then it was taken in Green Cay wetland. Yeah, Green Cay wetlands, which is there's a couple of towns that are close together. I think it's Delray Beach, but it may be outside of Boynton Beach. I get them mixed up down there, but Florida, and kind of near where my grandparents live, and so I get to go to this place and Wakota-Hatchie Wetlands, another place. I'm sure there's a photo you're going to show from there at some point. So I go to both those places a lot, so that they're just really cool places. They're boardwalks that go through the wetlands and can get very close.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then this one, I really wanted to include. My grandmother was a true friend to spiders.
Yeah.
She loved them.
Very cool.
All different types of them. Anytime there was one building an elaborate web around her house, she would take pictures of it and make sure the young kids wouldn't just go whack it off and stuff like that.
Of course.
So I was really, pleased and happy to see that you also were not opposed to capturing, what most people just walk past and think too scary.
Well, I will say it's interesting, but on a personal note, I actually am a little afraid of spiders, which is funny. But I was bit on the eye, like right next to my eye when I was a kid, by a wolf spider, and almost went blind in my left eye.
That's
and
crazy.
So I've always been afraid of spiders since.
That makes naturally, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but I won't say I don't like spiders, but I'm not like a huge fan. But I had been wanting to capture a photo with the spider and the web in it, and this was in Ding Darling again in Sanibel, and it was in some mangroves, but just the way the sun was coming in and was hitting the web, I was like, oh, might be the opportunity, and so captured this one. This is definitely one of those where it's either people love it and it's one of their favorites, or they hate it and can't look at it. So yeah, it's a fun one to have out at a show because you get the reactions.
Yeah, that's awesome. And this one, I made sure to include this. I'm interested in your approach to this question because of your background in finance and business and being an entrepreneur. That's a very competitive environment. And this photo of two bisons playing or competing with each other goes into that. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts first on competition in the art world. Do you think about that at all? Are you in competition or?
I'll start with, I still have trouble calling myself an artist because I've not been doing any kind of art for very long at all. And so there's people like Corey who studied art and went to school for art and, technically can talk about art and all of that. And I have trouble technically talking about my camera. Okay. And so I'm not saying this to sound one way or another, but I really tried to come up with an idea of a way to display wildlife photography that I had never seen and had trouble finding when I looked for it. And I have been told too many times now by artists that they've never seen a photographer do what I'm doing in this way and framing their own pieces all the time and only having the large scale and including the information and elements and all these other things. And so I really, when I started this, the whole point was, how can I make a piece that isn't in competition with anything else? Because I didn't want to be another photographer selling prints, because I would lose that battle because I'm not a great. I mean, I've only been doing photography for so many years now, and so I don't want to compete with people that have been wildlife photographers for 20 years. And so that was one of the original points of, okay, how can I make this more than just that and make the whole piece a piece of art so that I'm in my own category, which has been great. And then it's hard to apply to things as well when you're not in a category and don't fit in a category. And so it's double-edged sword, right? It's good to be different and to be kind of one of a kind, and no one's really seen anything like this, or most people haven't seen anything like this, and then it's hard to be put in a box because it's not really in a box. So yeah.
But you know, I think one thing, and I haven't talked to all the guests about this, but one thing is also competition for just dollars too. Like,
yeah, 100%. There's only so many to go around.
Yeah, exactly. Do you feel any of that in your work, or are you just coming from a pure place? How do you feel like?
I don't sell smaller stuff, and so I'm only selling stuff at a much higher price point, and so I kind of come down on the idea of you have to fall in love with it, and if someone falls in love with it, they're likely to again want it and not go off on some other thing, because I am in my own space in a sense. And so I just really don't think about it in that way. I don't think my stuff is in competition that much with anything in the sense of it's an acquired taste as well. Not everyone wants to have animals in your face on your wall in your house or in a public space in an office or anything like that. But if you do love animals and wildlife, then my stuff is a really good way to encompass all of your love for any aspect of wildlife or nature. But yes, I mean, again, any individual person is only going to spend so much on artwork. And so from that sense, you're always in competition for those dollars in a sense, but too hard to project that, kind of thing.
Another way you could think about this, I'm just thinking about this on the fly right now, but you are in competition for people's attention, especially with the urgency around your message too. And I think, with your pieces being so differentiated, do you ever think about that part of the competition, like competing for, everyone has, not everyone, a lot of people have lower attention spans now. They're distracted by a lot of platforms, media, consumerism, capitalism. Do you think about that in your work at all, or?
I guess that all kind of ties into, I do want the pieces to be eye-catching and in your face, and that's why I only do the large-scale work, and am not really interested in making small. I will sometimes make a smaller custom piece, but it's really not how I want the artwork to be anywhere. So I want it to be the type of thing where you are, whether or not you love animals, love nature, like nature, don't like any of it, you're going to notice the piece because it is big and it is bright. They're color. Even the black and whites are colorful because the wood and everything. It's just in your face. And so that's definitely always been a part of how I wanted them to come off to people. And the whole point is to make people look at it and then hopefully make people ask questions like, what the hell are those vials? Let me read the plaque. Oh. And then go to the logo and then, and bounce around between all the different aspects of the piece. And so to ultimately, hopefully, make people think about it in a larger way and make people view animals as individuals and not just a species disconnected from humans. I mean, I do not consider humans any different than that black-tailed jackrabbit. You know, you can take a picture of, you can have a black and white photo of an old person, you know, that has lots of emotion and character and looks old, wise, sage, or mean, or whatever, right? And so thinking about wildlife and animals in that way is the only way that I think enough people would ever care about animals to even be aware that we are going through a mass extinction period where animals are dying at a faster entire species of animals are disappearing at a faster rate than any other time in human history. You know, that should be a statement that everyone knows, and people still argue with me about it, even as being factual, and that's, you know, problematic. And so the whole point of my art is for people to realize that, you know, in the end. But obviously you have to get deep into the art to even recognize that, and that's also the point, was that it can, just as that's the ultimate goal with my art, but I am doing it so that I can enjoy nature in the meantime. Okay, the whole point of the viewer of the artwork is they can get those messages, but in the meantime they can just enjoy the piece, right?
Yeah. And I should save this question for the end, but I'm going down a rabbit hole now. I'm curious to see if in your career you explore more, because these pieces are so interactive and interconnected already, how far you're going to push that to get your message across. You know, you don't need to answer unless
I've got some ideas. I
Okay.
definitely want.
That's awesome.
I want more to it. I
That's
definitely want more stuff, and I've had a couple of ideas, and they just don't work quite well enough yet. So I haven't solved it yet, but I definitely want more to it.
Yeah.
In the end,
I'll be patiently waiting.
they'll be evolving. Yeah,
That'll
sure.
be cool to see. All right. Do you want to just talk about this piece too? You know, I know we've talked around it a little bit, but where is this?
Okay.
What is it? You know?
Yeah. So this is in Yellowstone, Lamar Valley, which is definitely one of my top places to photograph. I love Madeira. Definitely wasn't one of my top places to go photograph, just because there are no animals.
Gotcha.
But in terms of top places to photograph, I'll go ahead and list those because that's a common question everyone loves. And Yellowstone and Lamar Valley in Yellowstone, definitely. Too many people, but the only place that I've ever been in the United States with so much wildlife to where you really feel, it's not, but you feel like it's the way it was hundreds of years ago. And you can imagine what it's like. And so the Lamar Valley is called the Serengeti of North America, or, you know, of America or something. But anyway, compared to Africa, because you really do just see so much in wildlife. And so one of my favorite places for sure. The other ones I'll list off fast, but Joshua Tree National Park as well throughout, and then Sanibel would be the other one. But yeah, this one was really cool. Whenever I'm deciding what photos to print for a show or which batch of photos I want to print next, I send out some photos to family and friends. And it was funny because nobody picked this one over and over and over again except for me and Corey. And we love this one. And I love it because all of the hooves of the one on the left are in the air. So it's completely airborne, which was, you know, cool little moment to capture. And there's just so much action. It's, again, a little bit different because it is two individuals for me there. But so much action and, you know, a good story is just baked into the photo. And so anyway, I printed the photo. Finally, I was like, I don't care what anybody says, I'm printing the photo because I loved it. And I sold it the first show I did with the printed photo. So proved them all wrong.
Yeah, prove them wrong.
But it's definitely one of my favorites.
It's funny you and Corey like it because this is how I imagine you two on
Button heads.
Well, not just button heads, but like playing around.
Yeah.
You know.
That's a good one.
So
So this next one too, I know this is one of your favorites. So
Yeah,
you want to just walk us through, tell us the story?
for sure. So this is in Joshua Tree, and I had been walking around all morning for this one in an area that I had scouted out where I had seen a lot of action, and we had heard that there was a lot of animal activity. And so and it was also where Corey was painting, and so we were on a trip together, and we usually do the same areas because wherever he's painting. And so anyway, I was walking around this area for a few hours, was walking back to the car, and it was like 11:30, almost noon, getting hot. Wasn't expecting to see anything, and then all of a sudden I see a bobcat just sitting there. So I sat down on the ground, probably sat there for 40 minutes, just taking photos sporadically. It put its head down and fell asleep for a little while. I mean, it couldn't have cared less, and I was not more than 40 yards away.
Wow.
And then every so often it would look up at me, and that's when I was snapping photos. I moved around a little bit just to get different angles. It was just, I didn't know when to leave, but I didn't want to leave because it was a very cool moment. And then somebody else walked by really far away, but they were talking and being loud and everything, and it immediately got up and dipped and walked back to the car. So cool. And we're talking to a guy, another wildlife photographer there, and I was telling him about what happened, and he goes out to Joshua Tree every single day, has for 20 years. All he does is photograph in Joshua Tree, and he had only seen a bobcat in Joshua Tree once.
Wow.
And so I went from thinking it was a really cool moment to a once in a lifetime moment.
Yeah.
And I definitely will never spend as much time as that guy has spent there. But hopefully I'll see. I know where it lives. So I'm hoping to see it again. But it's a very cool moment. Not my favorite photo, but definitely one of my favorite stories around the photo. A hard animal to see anywhere, really, but very cool to see a bobcat in the desert.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And, one thing Corey talked about was getting used to the color palette in Joshua Tree, and, knowing this is at noon, you can kind of tell from how the shade's coming down, because center sun. But yeah, being able to capture that in the darkness, despite it being noon, is an interesting little character vignette for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really awesome. And, bobcats are like 25 pounds, right? Around
Depends on where they are. A little bit bigger than that, I would say. But
is this
on the
like a
smaller
house
side,
cat? Or
bigger than a house cat. Yeah, like a medium dog, small medium dog.
So like 30,
definition
40 pounds.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Yeah,
That's awesome. So if it hadn't been for the loud tourists, you would have spent more time.
I was hungry, man. I was ready to go back, but I just couldn't leave until.
How hot was it that day?
It was getting pretty toasty. We were there pretty early. It was earlier in the year even than now. I think we were there in March, so it wasn't crazy bad, but it was getting a little toasty.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Yeah, and this is, the one
That'd
that I
be
had
one
to
of your
get off. Yeah. The snowy egret.
Yep.
So we're transitioning from kind of the land animals part of it now. I call this the air.
Yeah.
Now, have you always, the first photo you took was of a bird as well, like through the binoculars.
Yeah.
Do you have a love for birds?
I do. I don't have, it's not more so than other animals, but I would say I developed a higher knowledge, like just of what type of bird I'm looking at or whatever. Being in Florida and spending a lot of time in Florida, and there being so many different types of egrets and herons and wading birds and shorebirds and everything else, and so you just see more birds. And so a lot of my photographs are birds because I spend a lot of time in Florida taking photographs, and a lot of animals you see are birds. So it's not necessarily a focus intentionally, but they also, are sometimes easier to take photos of, in the sense of they are pretty, right? They make nice motions, and give you more opportunity to take good photos. So just quantity and opportunity.
Yeah, and this is, it's definitely, I love it for different reasons. For personal reasons, it feels alchemical to me in a lot of ways. It's like the flight of the alone to the alone, but I know there's a different story behind it. It's not actually alone.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
Would you want to give us the story behind this one, and why it was so important that you choose this one?
Yeah, so this was early on in the process. Honestly, one of the first, it may have been the first trip I took with my camera, and it was in this is Ding Darling, Sanibel Island again, and I was actually not kayaking for this. There's a road that goes through the refuge, and was on the road, and it was a unique day because the tide was really low, and so there was tons of birds. I mean, close to what it used to be when I was a kid, and they were all sitting up in the mangroves and just darting back and forth catching fish because it was so shallow, and it was a coordination of time of year, so it was a mullet run, and so there was tons of tiny little mullet, and the tide was really low, and so just hundreds of birds flying back and forth. And so to be honest, I was still like learning my camera, and so I was taking photos at all different settings just to see, and happened upon this and started taking a ton of photos with my camera settings on what they were for this shot, because I absolutely loved how dark the background was, and just having it blacked out. I mean, it was bright sun, 9 in the morning, so I mean it was full sun, but just I've happened upon them, and I've used these settings many times before now, or after that, since then, and really loved how it just put all the emphasis on the bird being white with the background, and so I had a series of these, and I, in the beginning, was referring to all of them as the snowies dancing across the water because of how they were just barely even touching the water to catch a fish, and then walking almost as they flew off.
Yeah, and I love the yellow accents of the feed and the eye specifically, but also the background.
A leaf and a couple leaves in there.
Yeah, exactly. Those were what really caught my eye and drew me to this one. But it also, I don't know, for me, all the works I had seen before this from you, the one that I would have gotten was the bighorn sheep going down the cliff if it wasn't for this one. This one just seemed like a transition point for your work, from my experience, right? I know you know your work a lot better than me, but
well, it's funny because it was one of the earliest ones, and that the other one was probably a year later, honestly.
Oh, gotcha.
But and so that's why I say I got a little lucky with this, just in the sense of I happened across these settings that I liked, which I really didn't quite know yet what I was doing, but I was experimenting, so I was going all across the board, and really liked how it turned out as well. So I kind of based some of my future stuff off of this as well.
Yeah, and I have this proudly in my living room.
Yes, indeed.
It's one of my
and perfectly surrounded by plants and everything, so it makes it even more.
It creates the vibe for sure.
Beautiful. And not in this frame. You have the one with the Pecky Cypress, which I like even better. But it's tough to find Pecky Cypress, so can't always do it.
Yeah, maybe just for a minute, take us through the process of picking the wood.
Okay. It's, I think I said, all reclaimed or salvaged.
Yep.
And so a lot of my wood, I started off when I was coming up with this idea in the beginning. My mom has some woodworker friends in West Virginia and who have a ton of wood and are kind of winding down their business. And they loved my ideas. I had nothing concrete made at all yet, but they loved what I was talking about wanting to do. And so they gifted me with a good bit of wood in the beginning of this whole process. And a lot of my cypress came from them originally. And that was a great start because wood is expensive, even reclaimed and stuff. Even wood that was going to the dump is expensive, and so that got me a good start. Since then, I try to make contacts everywhere I go. I have my most reliable and person I go back to a lot is actually in Key West. So a lot of my wood, the wood in this photo or in this frame, comes from Key West. It's Cuban mahogany. Should have been going through what all the woods were on the other photos too, but I do get a lot of it from Key West, and he's a salvager, and so he saves it all from going to the dumps. So it's just from construction sites or whatever, and I just like a lot how those woods, a lot of those tropical woods look, and
For sure.
The colors of them and all of the wormholes and all the character in the wood. When I've gotten a lot better at picking wood. It was actually something that I definitely messed up a few in the beginning of buying pieces of wood that I could not use because I, again, didn't quite know what I was doing yet in the beginning. But I know kind of when I see a piece of wood if I think it's how it's going to work. But I do like to make frames out of a single piece of wood. So I split them in half first, and so then they need to be long enough that I can get all 4 pieces out of it. But I like doing that because then it works a lot better. You can tell, maybe not that it came from the same piece, but the colors match up better when they are from the same piece and whatnot. So I've gotten better about that. But it's just about finding wood that is, first off, thick, wide enough so that I can have the display case. That's one pivotal piece. So it has to have a section in the wood somewhere that I know I can put the display case for the vials. But then beyond that, I just want character.
Yeah, and there's tons of character in this. It also adds to the palette itself of the experience, which I think gives your pieces a big advantage against, traditional photographers that may just use a black or a walnut frame.
Mm-hmm.
This gives it...
Yeah, freaking walnut frames, man. No.
Yeah, it gives it a breadth.
For Corey's work there.
Corey makes his palette with the paint. This is, the palette with
100%.
the materials. So I love that about your work. And it really does. Like, I think, like even this example, like it does add to the photo. Like it's not just there to frame the window, but
Right.
it's there to be part of the piece. And I love that about that.
Thank you.
And, just going through your website, if you haven't been to Jake's website, I definitely recommend checking it out because there are tons of photos on there that he hasn't framed, and he's gone through and classified it all by the species, but also where it is. You have a lot of different classification methods. But one thing I started loving about being on your website was you capture some animals and animal species multiple times, and then you start to really develop a narrative in your mind about the personalities these animals have, right?
100%. Yep.
So this was one of the ones that I loved, and I thought, for me, the most striking part is the eye. I think that's where my eye goes.
Yeah.
But maybe talk us through this one. Is this at Sanibel Island too?
This is at Tarpon Bay in Sanibel. It's actually the only photo I have at Tarpon Bay. And I was kayaking for this as well. I've always loved this one, just the position that the bird was in and how dirty it is down in the muck and everything. So I've always thought it was just a cool scene and a cool story. You know, why is it so dirty? How did it get there? You know, so another thing, this was an early photo as well, and you know, everyone titles their pieces. I don't title any of my photos. I just title it with the name, with the species, and take that for whatever, you know. Some people like that, some people don't, but this one was the only one in the beginning that made me question whether or not to do that, because I had an easy title for it with regard to Icarus, because it just struck me at the first time I saw the photo after I took it and saw it on the computer at home. I just thought of that immediately, which is funny for me because not very spiritual in any way or anything, but it just struck me as that being the ibis that fell down into the muck, you know, and everything.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that, but when you explained it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, how's this majestic bird? Maybe he was wrestling with that raccoon.
Yeah, yeah. That was the noise I heard. Yes, 100%.
But yeah, I love this photo a lot, and I think one thing that you talk about in your work, and maybe you can talk about it some more, is catching animals, and everyone catches them in dynamic poses, but catching them in like uncharacteristically dynamic poses, like picking at under their wing, or you know, scratching their head, or things like that.
It goes into the capturing the animal being themselves, you know, in their daily life, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I really like doing, and that helps give more character to that individual animal as well, you know.
Yeah.
This, you know, could be the goofy ibis of the bunch that always messes up, and you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But just gives a little more background or character, individuality to that specific animal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this was another one that I loved a lot when I was looking at your website. So I was between this one and then there's one where the mother's like actually feeding the chicks. First of all, how'd you find the nest? And then like, what do you think about this one? I think this is a funny picture because the babies look like they have like a mohawk going on and stuff.
So I love this photo a lot. It's one of the most recent photos I've taken, actually. This was just a couple months ago. This is at Wakotahachie Wetlands, so one of those places near my grandparents' house in Florida. And so the boardwalk goes through the entire wetlands area, and so you are in it, but because you're raised and everything, and the animals are very used to it being there, you're not, you know, obtrusive on the environment, but you are close. So this nest was right off the boardwalk. The tricky part about it was there were so many branches and leaves around it, and it was a very windy day. Well, I was there 2 days, and it was very windy both days, and so I took a ton of photos. This photo actually is probably the one I staked out for the longest of any photo I've taken. And I sat there looking at this nest for probably 6 hours or 7 hours over the course of 2 days.
Wow.
Because it was just very difficult to get a window into there where a leaf wasn't, you know, over one of the baby's eyes, or and so to get all three of them in there at the same time took a lot of shots.
Yeah.
Cool stuff about it. The babies are 10 days old, which I learned from a volunteer there, and that was, you know, had been there every day since they've been born. And these, as you see in the other photo that you almost put up on here, they are eating whole fish. And I saw one of them eat a lizard that was 6 inches long.
Wow.
At 10 days old.
Wow.
I mean, they are monsters.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'll put the other photo up too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because it was wild seeing them. I mean, they were just eating whole fish after whole fish after whole fish. So I never experienced. I was unaware completely that they would eat such large meals at 10 days old. But yeah, these are great egrets, by the way. I mentioned that as well. And yeah, it was really fun just to watch them. It was definitely the best look at such young egrets that I've had.
Yeah, and it's a great composition. I mean, the eyes are acting as a guiding line, and then the pelican, the egret. I'm not a bird person.
Yeah.
The egret's nose is drawing you back down into the nest, and it's all kind of framed in those leaves as well. So it's a great composition and standalone. But I'll be fascinated to see how you frame it and
Appreciate it.
all those things and who ends up getting it.
Yeah, so you didn't see one framed because I've actually sold this piece. I framed it immediately and immediately sold it. So yeah, that's why you didn't see that.
So how
are
you driving a majority of your sales like online now? Like, are people
some online, mostly through shows. So doing in-person shows. I just had somebody that come by the shop that purchased that piece that came by the shop here and looked through all my work and picked out a couple actually that they liked. So a mix, but most of my sales are coming from artist shows, art shows.
Gotcha. That's perfect. Yeah, and this is a great piece too. This is another. So you have a whole section on your website for bird of prey.
Yeah,
and I find it fascinating when predators are in vulnerable positions.
Okay.
And I think this isn't necessarily a vulnerable position, but it's a position where you wouldn't kind of expect a bird to be in.
Right.
Maybe talk us through this one. And
this is definitely one of my favorite frames. Again, I love all the frames that have holes around the glass edge.
Yeah.
Those are definitely my favorites. A little trickier to get the frame to work, but when it's possible, definitely my favorite way to do it. And that is I'll start saying the wood too. That is bald cypress, not pecky cypress, because it does not have all the bug holes in it. That's what makes pecky cypress. So this is just the bald cypress. The photo is back in Sanibel again. It's over in what is it? Clan Bayou, but there's another name for exactly where this is. But anyway, Clan Bayou gets you close enough on Sanibel, and I was kayaking for this as well. And the funny thing about this one is, people say, "Wow, I've never seen an osprey do that." To your point, right? And I really didn't either. It happened so fast that I barely even witnessed this. I was kayaking it's a very curvy waterway, back in some mangroves again, and came around a turn, and we both scared each other equally. And so I mean, it was doing that, and I immediately grabbed my camera, flipped it up, took a photo, and it was gone. I mean, a second later.
wow.
And flew off because I was right underneath it. I mean, we just totally scared each other. And but I was able to get the photo, and yeah, it just turned out great. Perfectly fanned out as it's preening. So yeah, I love this photo for sure. One of my earlier photos.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the purpose of your work and stuff like that. It's interesting, but you're giving us a window into the natural world that we just don't see. You can watch nature documentaries and they'll capture some parts of an animal life, but mostly they're focusing on the big events.
Yeah, the action spots.
And not the nuance of everyday living, right?
Right, exactly.
So I really appreciate that about this piece too.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's just like an everyday thing, scratching your head, scratching your nose,
right,
or scratching your ear. It's a great piece too. And then
I love
very similar.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I love this one because we all, especially in the United States, have a majestic bald eagle in our imagination, and that we're told about. But this one's very different.
Goofy, man. I watched this one for a while, and I watched it catch a fish. I didn't get a photo of the fish catching process, but then it landed up on here, and I was it was kind of a fast area where it was really, the current was taking me, and so I had to keep paddling upstream and letting it float me back down or whatever. And there's a series of photos alongside this one on the website of it eating the fish, and now it's cleaning its beak, which it did this with it sticking its tongue out and wiped its beak all over this branch for 15 minutes. Never even heard of, just never, it was something I had never seen or thought of before, to your point, just daily life. And it was very goofy looking bird when it was doing all of that, but it was a fun experience. And so I got a couple fun photos. I don't know how much I like them, but they're too good to not include on the website just because the story around them, especially when you get I think there's 3 or 4 of them together, and just as a funny bird as it's cleaning off after chowing down.
Yeah, one thing I'm fascinated in asking you about too. So you've grown up your whole life in America.
Yeah.
Corey's very focused on being part of that American realism tradition, right? When you think of your work, just because it's in nature, it's very global in scope. But do you think about America specifically when you're making work? So
definitely not.
Gotcha. So you're more of a global citizen in that perspective.
Yeah, 100%.
Gotcha. So you're not opposed to going to different countries and exploring different wildlife.
Yeah. One of my earliest, I didn't get to touch on this earlier, but one of my first, big experiences of nature at a vaster scale or whatever was getting to go to Costa Rica, actually, when I was 11, I believe. Saw a spider monkey, multiple spider monkeys, my favorite animal.
So you've seen them in real life.
I've seen them in real life, not just a zoo,
Yeah.
But real life, swinging around. And Costa Rica, if I had been back since I've been taking photographs, it would be top of my list for that, for sure. I mean, just the vast array of species there. And fewer people, really, I would rather, I think probably eventually most of my photographs will come from outside of America, just because of how many more animals there are other places, because fewer people or less development, really.
So you're planning greater expeditions around the world.
For sure.
That's awesome. I would love to see you team up with Forrest Galante. You know him?
Oh yeah, I've heard. Yeah.
He goes after the, it was the mission you kind of cast off with, like, the going extinct animals.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think you'd be a good team member for him.
would love to do that. Just couldn't start there.
Yeah, exactly.
Had to get some compilation of photos together before I could, delve into, okay, I'm only going to get a photo of this animal this year, kind of thing.
Exactly. So, and this was a fascinating. So, correct me if I'm wrong. I could very well be wrong, but this is a stork, right?
Wood stork. Yep.
And this might just be my own ignorance showing, but when I think of a stork, I think of the bird that brings the baby, right?
Right.
But this bird looks very different.
A little prehistoric looking, right?
Yeah. Would you walk us through, where you were when you saw this one? And
this is back at Wakota-Hatchie Wetlands again. So as you can see, I spend a good bit of time in some of the same places around Florida. and I end up getting photos there just because I know the space as well, and I have a lot of access to the animals in Sanibel and Wakotahachie and Green Cay. But there's tons of nesting wood storks in Wakotahachie, and so this is during the time where they're building their nests, and so they're just hella active, flying around, grabbing sticks, and building their really rickety nests in the tops of these mangroves that look dead. I mean, it just doesn't seem like they could possibly work, but it's very fun to watch and witness. And the sun was just working with me really well on this particular day. I was there at a good time, and yeah, I mean, they look like it looks more like a pterodactyl or something than something that lives now, right?
For sure.
And so, yeah, I really like, there's this one and a couple other photos that are kind of similar. I haven't quite gotten it perfect. Don't know what to even say. I've tried to take this photo in a couple different ways a lot of times, and I really like it, but I haven't printed one yet.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful photograph for sure. I love the hints of teal and cyan and the feathers,
all that iridescence in there.
Yeah, it's and the prehistoric face,
right?
That face is incredibly striking, along with the feet. Yeah, I really love this one a lot. Yeah, and just like you said, like the almost prehistoric characteristics of it. It's really cool. But Florida can give you that feeling as well.
100%. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, it's a good one. And then this is back to the bird of prey.
Another osprey.
Yeah. Yeah. So just keep capturing those. Those are good. I love seeing the full wing spread on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you want
I have a good bit of osprey photos. They're very photographable, and they're very prevalent. A lot of places I go in Florida, and are not afraid, or very used to humans, right? So they're very used to doing things right around you and not worrying about you so much. So just because of that, I end up getting a lot of photos of them, but I do love them a lot as well. And always fun. And yeah, I love, again, I've taken a lot of photos like this too. I think a lot of people have. This is kind of a more typical photo that people end up taking when it's flying over you or whatnot, but it's fun to see all the detail under there. Maybe not as interesting of a photo because the lack of any kind of background because of the sky, but definitely cool to see that detail and perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I love photos like this too, just because you got the full wing spread.
Yeah.
But it's just amazing that they just don't fall out of the sky.
Right.
you know, like that always trips me up. You know, we spent thousands of years as humans trying to figure out how to stay in the sky.
Right.
And they just seem like they're falling. It's so weird. And this was another great one that I love too. The owl is a great symbol and sign in human history, but I don't know, this doesn't seem like Florida. Is it Florida?
This is Florida.
Gotcha.
This is where exactly, I forget exactly what town, but it's again near my grandparents, but not one of the wetlands I normally go to. But it's a burrowing owl, and as opposed to the rabbit, this one looks mean to me. It looks angry for sure. And so it's a specific park. I forget the name of it, but there's all these burrowing owls, and it's a park that includes a baseball field and stuff. So it is humanly populated big time, and I don't know if it seems bothered or not bothered by the human presence, but it was definitely giving off an energy or something, so it was worth capturing in this one for sure. But it's amazing how small these birds are. I mean, they are only about that tall. I mean, they are tiny, and but very cool too. I love owls for sure. So
yeah, and I love, you can tell that going from the iPhone to a real camera it brings out a lot more details, right? Like
only so much the iPhone can capture for sure.
Like the texture in this owl's eyes,
right,
are crazy. But yeah, the furrowed brow does make him look a little
skeptical or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one. And then this one I included too because I thought it was interesting that you capturing life in decay. All the plants around it are pretty much dead or dying.
Right.
But this bird, also, it just seems like a crazy picture to capture. Were you on the kayak for this one?
I was on this was in Green Cay, so I'm up on a walkway.
Gotcha.
Boardwalk. But yeah, another thing I like about this one that I have in a lot of other photos is, again, that narrow depth of field, and then having, in this one, not the background be blurred out, but having those things that poke in the foreground, the leaf, the stick, and makes it, to me, more like you're looking through a window. So it's the same thing as with the great egrets and the babies, where all those leaves are all, blurred out. It kind of goes back to the whole idea of the spyglass photography and having it blacked out around and just the focus on the animal. And so same kind of thing here, where it really looks like you're looking down a tunnel or through a window at the in this case, bowtail grackle.
Gotcha. Yeah, and these were interesting birds too. I had never seen these birds, so maybe tell us what they are, and then where was this? Was this Green Cay too, or?
No, this is Bailey Tract in Sanibel, Florida. So back to Sanibel, but a different place in Sanibel, Bailey Tract, probably my favorite place on the island. And so this is an anhinga, and so you've probably seen this bird, but you've seen it in the water, and you'll see them in cormorants, double-crested cormorants as well. All over the place in Florida. So I guarantee you've seen one, but they're always in the water fishing. So they called them snake birds, because when they're in the water, they swim in the water and dive down for fish, and they look like they're really long and skinny when they're in the water, and their neck is super long and skinny, so they look like a snake going through the water. But very, very fun birds. I really like this photo. I have taken a few photos of them sunbathing or whatever, and never quite got the feel in the photo that I wanted, and this was really close to sunset, and the sun was really working with me well here, and really like this photo a lot. But because most of the photos I have of anhingas are in the water or sunbathing right out of the water, so to have one that's up, not in the water but not wet, is little cool.
Yeah, and the red eye is really striking. The red eye surrounded with the blue. That's really...
And that's just a time of year thing. So the red eye is not, but the blue plumage around is a breeding.
They change the color around their
eye? All these birds, so all these Florida birds, well, not the grackle, but like all the herons and egrets, and then anhingas, will all, not the storks, but all the rest will change their plumage depending on the time of year.
Wow.
So during
I
breeding,
had no idea.
Yeah, during breeding, some of them get crazy. It's hard to even identify sometimes, because you're like, well, that doesn't look like the bird I know, but it's just because of a different time of year.
That's really fascinating. And then I had to include this one too, because this is like a bird doing yoga.
Yeah, another anhinga.
So this is the snake bird.
Snake bird, same bird as the last one. And yeah, this is in Bailey Tract as well, I believe. I took this photo a while ago. Very cool scene. I didn't quite take the photo how I would now, but nonetheless, just a cool moment to capture.
For sure, it shows like, you know, the playful side of nature. We always think about death, competition.
Yeah.
But this is
Survival of the fittest.
yeah, like the eagle scratching its beak and stuff. You know,
Right.
That's yeah, I love this one too. You know, one thing I like to ask people. I know you're still getting used to calling yourself an artist.
Yeah, we'll say that.
I was gonna say, I think most people after seeing this would agree that you're an artist.
I appreciate it.
Just it's because of the intentionality behind your work too. I think one thing I've been starting to ask people is, you know, for a younger version of yourself, what advice would you impart, you know, on this
Yeah.
journey?
I guess it's that whole thing of, you know, do something you actually care about, because that's really why I was able to come up with an idea that has been evocative to a lot of people, and that a lot of people have connected with, is because I created something, a way to show what I care about, right? So a way to try to impart the same thoughts, feelings, ideas that I have about animals onto people that are viewing my art. So I think that only comes if you're doing something you actually care about.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I also wanted to talk to you about, since you are an entrepreneur and you love finance as well, you know, what similarities, a lot of people don't think there's similarities between art and finance or entrepreneurship, but what similarities have you found and experience?
For entrepreneurs, I mean, again, I've over the course of a couple of businesses, including Matter Decks and a few things, I've worked with a lot of artists for a while, long before I was doing this. And even being a kid in West Virginia, and the people that I've worked with on, you know, when we're about building and, you know, working with handymen or woodworkers or whatever, it's that not enough artists treat their craft as a business. And so, I mean, it goes hand in hand. You can't be an artist pretty much and not be a salesperson of your art. And so you can't be an artist and not be an entrepreneur. Now, at least you can't start out. Maybe at some point you can do nothing but make your art and not worry about it. But you can't find an avenue to sell your art without being an entrepreneur about it. And so, I mean, it's not really goes hand in hand. It is the same thing. I mean, you can't, you know, becoming an artist is starting a business. Yeah. And so that's why you should treat it as such. And, you know, one of the first things I did was I made my first piece, and I timed every bit of it and knew exactly how long it took me to make a piece after I made one piece. And I mean, I knew every minute from how long it took me to take the photo, to edit the photo, to drive to get the wood, to make the frame, to make the display, to, you know, every bit of it. And so really, that's kind of the first step for me always with regard to a new business or whatever is, okay, what's the time put into the product that you're selling or whatever. And so that is definitely the background I have in thinking of it that way automatically. But everyone should, if not, they are already, they're just not necessarily applying what they subconsciously know maybe about what it takes to make their work or whatever.
Yeah, and you know, I know we've been recording for a while. Just curious, do you have themes or a direction where you're going with your future work that you want to tease to the audience, or?
I can't say that. I mean, continuing what I'm doing, really. I haven't gotten bored with the original concept and idea yet.
That's awesome.
So definitely just continuing that, continuing to get better and better about framing my photos, not the wood, but the composition of the piece, and framing how the animal is in the photo and what's in the background and all of that kind of stuff. I've definitely gotten better at that, and I like more of my photos more now than a couple years ago, and a couple years before that. And so yeah, just continuing that and getting more wood and a variety, more variety, more animals, more locations, all of that.
Yeah, for sure. And people can follow you on your website. They can sign up for your newsletter.
100%. Yes, indeed.
Follow you on your Instagram. Get in contact if they want to purchase pieces. Or how's the custom work? Do you want to give people a rundown on how that works?
Yeah, everything is on my website. I don't do as much. I don't do much of anything on social media. I run all my stuff through my website. So if you want to keep up with me, the website's the place to do it. And for custom work, I can always print any photo that's on my website in any frame that I already have made. I can print it and put it in a frame. But for custom work, I can make anything to any size as well. And we can work with what wood I use. So I offer to people the ability to, if you have a barn on your property that's falling down and you want me to make a frame with wood from the barn and take a photo of an animal on your land, so it can be a all-encompassing piece for you, I can do that. Or we can be less customized than that as well. So it can be any range of customization that somebody wants. But yeah, the website explains it all. So if you're interested, going on there. Also, always have listed what shows I'm going to be doing around the country. So if you can always check on that. And if you're in the area, you can always come see my work in person, which is always, as we said in the beginning, a little bit better in terms of getting an idea of the work.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely recommend, if you have the opportunity, going to see Jake's work in person. I think that's the best place to see it. These pictures hopefully are visually appealing to all of you and striking, but seeing it in person is just a different experience.
Thank you.
Especially, just playing with the magnet, seeing the vials in person, but also seeing the composition and also seeing the grains of the wood that you frame it. It's an experience. I want to thank you for the time today. It was a great podcast. I hope it's not the last time you're on the podcast, but
just
for the time being, so keep in contact and keep track of where Jake and his work are. Follow his newsletter on his website, and thank you again for being willing to share your story, your work, and also where it may be going. I like seeing the new stuff sprinkled in with the old stuff, and I think we gave people a good idea of how the artistic journey has been for you so far. And I'm excited to see what happens with the other projects you're working on too. I'm sure they're gonna rear their heads again. So.
Yeah, they're not down for good.
Exactly. So I think people can just send you an email through your website too. So if you got any inquiries about the earlier stuff he was talking about, feel free to reach out to him there. But
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.